On the morning of January 15th, 1947, a young mother walking with her child in a Los Angeles neighborhood made a discovery that would become one of the city's most enduring unsolved mysteries. The victim was 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, a young woman who had recently moved to Los Angeles hoping to build a career in Hollywood. Within days, the press had given her a name that would outlive her own, the Black Dahlia. What investigators found at the scene was severe enough that it immediately signaled this wasn't an ordinary crime. The case would go on to involve one of the largest police investigations in Los Angeles history. The FBI was brought in to help identify her, using an early fax technology to transmit her fingerprints from Los Angeles and getting a match back in less than an hour, remarkably fast for 1947. The case triggered a media frenzy almost immediately. Reporters swarmed the investigation, and the sensational press coverage shaped public perception of Short for decades, often overshadowing who she actually was as a person. Short had grown up on the East Coast before moving west, drawn like many young people of that era by the promise of Hollywood. Friends described her as warm and well-liked, someone still working toward the life she'd hoped to build. Police conducted hundreds of interviews in the following months. More than 60 people falsely confessed to the killing, complicating an already difficult investigation and wasting valuable detective time chasing false leads. Investigators at the time believed whoever was responsible had some degree of medical or anatomical knowledge, a detail that shaped decades of suspect theories, though it was never definitively proven. Robert Manley, a salesman who had recently spent time with Short, was investigated and briefly held before being cleared through a polygraph test and lack of physical evidence connecting him to the scene. Investigators pursued dozens of other leads and suspects over the following years, from acquaintances to strangers who inserted themselves into the investigation, without ever securing enough evidence to charge anyone. As the years passed without an arrest, the case went cold, joining the ranks of Los Angeles' oldest unsolved homicides, revisited periodically by new generations of detectives and researchers. Decades later, journalist and author Steve Hodel, a former lapped homicide detective himself, proposed a theory implicating his own father, physician George Hodel, based on years of independent research into old case files and letters. Hodel pointed to alleged handwriting similarities in letters the killer sent to police, along with circumstantial connections between his father and the case, building a book-length argument that drew significant public attention. The Hodel theory remains one of many proposed over the decades. Investigators and researchers continue to disagree about its strength, and it has never been formally confirmed or acted upon by law enforcement. The Los Angeles Police Department has periodically revisited the case using modern forensic techniques, though the original file, like many cases this old, is limited by evidence collection standards of the 1940s. The case has inspired numerous books, documentaries, and films over the decades, cementing its place in American true crime history, even as the actual answer remains as elusive as it was in 1947. Elizabeth Short was 22 years old. She had a family, ambitions, and a life that existed long before the label the press gave her, one that's often overshadowed the actual person at the center of this case. Nearly 80 years later, her case remains open, one of the longest unsolved murder investigations in Los Angeles history. Follow for more stories where the questions have outlived almost everyone who could have answered them.